In Exodus chapter 1, we read that there arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Joseph, of course, was one of the 12 sons of Israel. Joseph ended up in Egypt after being sold as a slave by his own brothers. But the grace of God enabled Joseph to gain tremendous favor with the ruler of Egypt at that time. He had such favor with this Pharaoh that he became Pharaoh's chief counselor and second in command, despite the fact that Joseph was an ethnic foreigner. The favor that God gave Joseph actually overflowed onto Joseph's family, including the brothers that had sold him as a slave. And as a result, the whole family found refuge in Egypt. But, of course, it was inevitable that this gracious Pharaoh died. And eventually Joseph also died. And it is at this point that there arises a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. This story begins in the book of Genesis and continues in the book of Exodus, where in chapter 1 we actually read, "There arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph." At this point, some bad things begin to happen. The Egypt that had been a refuge for the Israelites, the descendants of Israel, became instead a prison, as they were as the entire nation came to be enslaved by the Egyptians. They were no longer guests, but they were now slaves. Now, this is a very well-known story in the Old Testament, and this saying about the rising of a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph has become almost a type of saying or proverb, meaning that someone or some group of people have forgotten God. They've perhaps they once knew God. As a people, they once knew God, but they've now turned their backs on him, and they're pursuing some other activity or some other they're engaged in some other type of worship or activity. And the saying goes that there has arisen a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. That is, they no longer know God. They no longer seek God. They no longer trust in the Word of God. And even today, we can say about the people of America, the people of the United States, that in our generation, in this up and coming young generation, there has arisen a spirit that knows not Joseph.